What difficulties do you face in balancing a leadership position in the secular world with a leadership position in the church world?
Well, probably the first balance is just strictly the time. Both jobs require that you give your best effort. So I've got to allot enough time for my regular job that pays all my bills and give it the time that it deserves. But then on the flip side, whenever it's time for church or in my off hours, I've got to be preparing or be ready to go for church work as well. So the time is probably one of the biggest issues.
Hmm. Cool. Are there any other difficulties associated as far as have you ever had any instances with your faith? And I know the answer might be no because we're from Searcy and that's a very, it's a very Christian town. But have there ever been any instances where your faith has interfered a little bit with your job at the bank?
I've never had it to really interfere. I've had people, that obviously don't believe like I would believe, and they've got their own opinions on different matters, and maybe they act a certain way that I wouldn't act. I've certainly got people that I work with that don't share my opinions, and oftentimes they'll call me preacher or they'll call me something like that, and it's an endearing term, but they recognize that there's a difference between their lifestyle and my lifestyle. And so I guess I more or less have noticed people noticing the differences between the way I live and the way that they live. But as far as running into a conflict between my church world and my business world, I haven't found any conflict. In fact, there's lots of times that I have utilized my Christian walk to try to aid or to help people at the bank. I've had customers before there one in particular that I had felt this lady had come in, and I just felt impressed to pray with her before she left my office, and I just said, "Hey, do you mind if I pray with you before you go?" And she said no, and I began to pray with her and just asked the Lord to protect her. And then, like 2 or 3 weeks later, found out that there was actually a murder that was involved in her household, and there were some people that were murdered in her household, and she was saved. She was out of the house when all that stuff happened. So, those are moments when my two worlds kind of collided, so to speak. But as far as conflicts, I hadn't found any conflicts.
Cool. So I know you have 3 children and a wife. So
Yeah.
How do you find time with 2 positions that demand a lot of your time? How do you find time for your family and making them the first priority?
Well, I've always, and there's some people that would disagree with this, but I kind of compartmentalize my life. I mean, whenever I'm with my wife and with my kids, that's the time that I try to give to them, and I try to set that time aside that's just for them. I try not to, bring in my work or the church stuff, whatever that's going on. I try not to bring that into our time together. So if they've got soccer games or they got karate tournaments or whatever, I do my best to try to keep my focus on them for those times. I mean, sometimes it's difficult. I mean, with cell phones and email that gets routed through your phones these days. I mean, you're accessible no matter where you go. So there's times that stuff overlaps, but I do my best to try to keep my time with them, separate.
Right. Cool. Okay. Coming from small-ish town Arkansas, where the church is more traditional than it is in North Texas, explain how the worship has changed a little bit. Explain the scenario, at least within the church, and how you've tried to usher in a little bit of change in the worship department.
Well, I've been doing this now for, I guess, 16 years, something like that, 15, 16 years. And whenever I first took it over, we were predominantly, driven by hymns and driven by short worship courses or short praise courses. So there wasn't the Hillsong and all that stuff that's kind of come along now with your multiple verses and your multiple bridges and your two choruses and all this stuff. That wasn't really around yet, but there were some longer. The difference is that today's courses are becoming more lengthy. In fact, we sing whole songs, whereas used to we would just sing choruses. We would just sing short phrases of a song. But now it's not uncommon to sing 3-4 verses of a song, plus its chorus, plus its bridge, where that used to be like a separate, just a church special.
Cool. Have there been any difficulties associated with that in trying to transition that to fit both in a sense?
Well, you've always got one side or the other that would love to see it be all one way or all another way. I mean, you're just naturally going to have people that like one thing or the other. But, outside of just people's preferences, I think if you're just consistent and trying to trying to reach the whole congregation, if you're just consistent in the way that you approach people, I think that they accept that. I mean, they see your heart. And if the songs are all driven towards trying to bring us to worship Christ, at least our group has been accepting of that. They've not been, they've not pushed that away. So I think where a worship leader can get into trouble is if they try to take a congregation that they know is all behind hymns and they try to just push entirely Chris Tomlin and Third Day and Casting Crowns down their throat. Mm-hmm. Those people aren't worship to that. And so you can't take a church that's at point A and try to get them to Z. It's just not going to happen. You might be able to take that church from A and move them to C and get them a little further down the road, but you're not going to move a congregation all the way over. You can only move it by increments.
Right. Okay, cool. And last question, what have you learned in balancing two jobs and having one leadership position in the secular world and one in the church world? What would you say is a lesson you would pass on to other people?
I like having both roles. I see myself as a bridge. In many respects, I'm able to talk to people that our pastor will never get to talk to. They will never come see him. He will probably never be out in the community in some of the situations that I'm out in, and may or may not have the same type of respect level that somebody in a similar position like mine might have within the community. And so you build up rapport with both sides. I guess that what I've learned is that it's okay to have both a secular job and if you want to call it a religious job or a spiritual job. There's nothing wrong with being bivocational. Paul himself was a tent maker, and yet he still preached the gospel. He was able to fund his own ministry to some degree, even though he did ask for help from churches along the way. He was still able to have a trade and be able to help to promote his own ministry and not have to be completely reliant on the churches to fund his expeditions. And I like that respect myself. I enjoy